nervous. Oh,
Hi, and welcome to our presentation. We'll be exploring the article, Combining Music and Indoor and Spatial Factors to Help Improve College Students' Emotional Communication. My name's Lane, this is Hannah, and we're gonna get started.
okay. So just a quick overview of the article. So basically, it's about the study claims to indicate whether the perception of one's music environment has influence on college students' emotion during communication in different indoor conditions, including the spatial function, the visual and sound atmospheres, and the interior furnishings. Okay, so the article argues that college is a period characterized by a dynamic development of the brain and strong interactions within the social environment. And basically what this means is the article kind of studied the mental health of college students. And that basically we deserve more attention because we're at a very vulnerable point in our life and are prone to a lot of psychological problems. And what they found was the use of architectural design to improve communication spaces and promote interaction is of great significance because it actually helps communication abilities, which is really important in college to get that social interactions in and to enhance the social interactions that we have with one another.
Yeah, and this is especially relevant today due to the effect of COVID that's had on a lot of young kids' mental health, being pulled out of high schools and colleges all over for semesters at a time, being told to isolate. So, this research is very important, very relevant for the time.
Okay, so how did they conduct the study? So basically, the study utilized the three-dimensional pleasure, arousal, dominance, emotional model, short for PAD, and basically this helped kind of measure the students and how they were feeling in the different environments. So basically what they did was they had an acoustic environmental measurement, and it was performed and evaluated the emotion during communication. And that was what they investigated in each of the different spaces that they studied. So basically it's a field study that they did, which is pretty interesting and unique and, relevant to psychology as well as anthropology as well. Okay, so a little more on how did they conduct the study. So basically, they sent out a questionnaire and they surveyed 331 participants at 6 experimental sites, which included a classroom space, a learning corridor, a coffee shop, a fast food restaurant, a dormitory, and a living room. And it all consisted of graduate and undergraduate students. So that was the main, who they studied. And college students' emotion during communication, what they found in different indoor conditions was that it had a pretty big effect, but we'll go into that later.
Yeah, and so these different areas are set up like common areas that college students, both undergraduate and graduate, would be in, such as classrooms, learning corridors, coffee shops, fast food restaurants, dormitories, and living rooms.
And like I said before, all participants were graduate students or undergraduate students at a university. And basically, just like a fun fact, being physically, emotionally, and psychologically aware of a space we occupy is a feeling we describe as being present. And that was one of the things that they studied. And what Lane was saying about COVID was that COVID had kind of hindered those relationships and how we engage in an environment in an indoor space. So that was kind of interesting and what stemmed from their project from the study.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also talking more a little bit about the participants of our group. This is very isolated to American graduate and undergraduate students. So not to be, necessarily exactly the same as, students in Europe or students, in Asia. So, we want to make sure that that limitation of the study is clear and concise.
Okay, so basically, they did an experimental design, and this graphic really helped me and helps the readers to understand how they conducted the study, which is pretty interesting. So they began the experiment, and then participants, they got familiar with the experimental environment, and they would talk to people, and then they would give out the questionnaires in the questionnaire, and then the participants would fill in the basic information, and then the music would sound, and participants would start to communicate, and then they'd keep communicating, then they'd turn off the music and stop communication, and they'd evaluate the music and emotion in the questionnaires, and that would be the end of the experiment. So it kind of gives a timeline of how it went down in the study, which is pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay. Lane, do you want to do this one or?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what do they find? Well, they found that the results in different functional spaces showed no significant effect of music on communication or emotional states. So essentially what this is saying is between the classroom, the coffee shop, they showed that there was no significant effect that the music that had on the music on how the communication and emotional states of the students. So this is more talking about the relationship between the music and the spaces as opposed to the spaces and the students.
And just going off of that point, they also found too, and just going off of what Liam was saying, that the musical sound kind of had like a masking effect on the noises, and that promoted communication, but there was not a lot of significant findings. And they also found that the average score of the musical evaluation was 1.09 higher in the warm tone space compared to the cold tone space. So this is one of the things that they measured in the experiment, which was really interesting, and something that they found was a factor. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so another effect they found was that the differences in the effects of music on emotion during communication in different sound environments were significant, and pleasure, arousal, and dominance could be efficiently enhanced by music in the quiet space. So this is basically saying that the music had more of an effect on the emotion than the sound, as kind of said in one of the earlier findings, and that the music did have an effect though on the emotional state. And so they found that music did affect the pleasure, arousal, and dominance in that PAD model that they used to measure the emotional states of the students. One thing they did find though between in the furnishing of the spaces was that dominance was 0.63 higher in the minimally furnished space. So this means that spaces that had less furnishing, less things kind of taking up it made people feel like they needed to exhibit more dominance, or they felt more dominant in communication and in conversation. So that was an interesting finding as well. Although there was not a lot of significant findings in the difference of the areas, there was some findings more deeper into like the furnishing and details of areas.
Yeah, and there was few studies, and the reason why they studied this was because there was few studies in the impact of audiovisual interaction on the interactive behavior, especially on emotional perception, which is what they were measuring. Because it's quite interesting that a furnished space can have impact on communication. So that was pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So the influence of social characteristics on the effect of music on communication in terms of indoor spaces, intimacy level, and the gender combination, and the group size that mattered in the study, and they found that all had significant impact on each in the environmental space.
Absolutely, and this is something that kind of logically I feel like is hypothesized, as a lot of people have personal experience interacting with both groups of the same gender, groups of different mixed gender, as opposed to being in a small room versus a big room. So these are kind of hypotheses that are confirmed. So if there are more than two communicators in a dining space, pleasure and arousal can be effectively enhanced by music. So this kind of more demonstrates that idea between music and emotional state, and the dining space factor is merely, I feel like, a placeholder for, like, just being individually with somebody or in a intimate kind of setting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the significance of the findings. So basically the study shows that combining the sound environment with spatial factors, including visual and sound, and like the visual and sound atmosphere, and the interior furnishings, can be an effective design strategy for promoting social interaction in indoor spaces. So that's kind of what they found, and they measured those various characteristics, and and it's really kind of cool that like a design space can actually, affect how communication happens with students, and it's kind of nice to know for colleges and universities around the world how music can have an effect on the ways in which we communicate with one another, and can enhance or inhibit how we socialize in a room, which is pretty interesting.
Absolutely, and it can also give kind of understanding to music that maybe organizations and colleges and stuff should play, or should at least have the ability to access, as it clearly demonstrates an increase in this ability to communicate, and an increase in these emotions of pleasure, arousal, and dominance. So this is something that can be, as Hannah said, very, very applicable to a lot of colleges and universities, especially in America.
Yeah.
This is something that I found really interesting. These are the designs of all the spaces that they had. So as you can see, there is a different sound source as indicated by the speaker, and they've set up not only having a sound source from different areas in different settings, but as well as having multiple measuring points instead of just one surrounding the source to get an idea. So I thought this was interesting to kind of control the study and really be able to get this idea of the relationship between this space, sound, and communication.
Yeah, it's really cool too, like being like college students ourselves, like we've definitely had these interactions in all of these spaces. So it's really cool that we kind of know what affects our communication and can enhance or inhibit that based off of spatially where things are. So it's pretty interesting, nice visual, like that Lane described.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So some of the key concepts, there's this idea of emotional contagion, and this is kind of like a ripple effect of human interaction through conscious or unconscious induction of emotional states and behavioral attitudes. So, one of the findings in the study was that music can lead to this emotional contagion, and that was word that they used a lot in the study. Hannah, would you like to describe maybe a little bit more on something?
Yeah. So basically, they use this just this definition of this word to kind of describe the effect that music had on in the space, and it basically led to this kind of like similar feeling if like if music was playing had an effect on the individual, but also like the individual that they were engaging and talking to. They had similar, emotional states and behavioral attitudes because of this like bonding and emotional connection they were having through the music. So it's really interesting that, even in a small or even a big space, we can kind of bond and have this emotional connection, unconsciously or consciously, through music, and kind of share this bond with one another, which is pretty cool and an interesting. I've never heard this term before, but I've learned about it in the study, which is pretty cool. They defined that that feeling or something, that term.
Yeah.
So why this study matters? This study matters because most studies have emotional perception and on the visual factors of spaces and ignored the combined sound environment. So again, few studies on the impact of the audiovisual interaction and the interactive behavior have been done, but this study especially kind of studied like the emotional perception that an indoor space can have with that can inhibit or enhance communication. And they found that through various factors that they studied, like the temperature in the room, where the music was, the lighting, because different lights can affect, if you feel fatigued or if you feel energized. So yeah, so that was pretty interesting to hear.
Yeah, and this study really did a good job too of kind of taking the idea of music increasing brain activity and was able to apply it to this kind of spatial psychology. And so that was a really interesting combination that this article was able to be demonstrated in this article. So in conclusion, especially with COVID, social anxiety is a widespread problem among college students. And one of the ways that we can assist in aiding the issue of social anxiety is through music and, certain settings of, communication and interaction. So as, facilitators of this development and experience, it's important to take into consideration the knowledge that we already have in order to provide the most ample and opportunistic opportunity for the students.
Mm-hmm. And it's going off of that point too, it's really, the intention that, colleges can make and other companies can make with the interior furnishings, the architectural design of a space, it matters. And so this is a really helpful study to kind of show, how different spaces can function for different needs and for different types of social interaction. So it's really, really cool. Thank you so much. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Do you want to show the reference page?
Oh, yeah. Is that?
Yeah, it's the next slide.
Thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.